Coming up on this week's Eastern Conference edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, is power shifting in the Metropolitan Division, and the NHL has announced updates to its All-Star Stills competition. All that and the classic tomfoolery we get up to here on the Eastern Conference Weekly Recap Show on Locked On NHL. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On NHL, your team every day. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network's local experts on the biggest stories. I'm Ross Levitan. With me, as always, it's Mike DiStefano. You can catch us 5 days a week. I'm at Locked On Senators. He's at Locked On Maple Leafs. It's the Battle of Ontario edition, as always. And last week, I went to the Battle of Ontario thanks to Game Time. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. It's the Game Time app. When you download the app and create an account, make sure you use Locked On NHL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. I went with some buddies. They're like, oh, I'm expecting it to be this much, and it was a lot less thanks to Game Time. Today is Wednesday, December 13th, and Mike, I don't think I've ever used the word tomfoolery before. I did in the intro, so that just means this will be a silly show. I literally had to Google the answer. What is tomfoolery? The answer is silly behavior. So everyone can get ready for a bunch of that today. How are you doing today, sir?
Yes, no, I think that's probably like when you said tomfoolery, I'm like, well, that's a word that I don't think has been used on this show ever before, but there you have it. Yeah, man, I think it'll be a good show. There's a lot going on. Lots going on, not only in the NHL, but also like we heard some new updates, a revamp to the skills competition at the All-Star game. So there's a lot to get into today.
Not only that, but the World Junior rosters for Team Canada are expected to be unveiled. We'll save that for the end of the show. Make sure you remind me, Mikey, because sometimes I forget this kind of stuff. And the roster could be unveiled during the show. It sounds like they're playing a final tune-up game. They're getting their asses kicked, by the way. The U Sports team is beating them 6-1 right now.
Oh, boy.
That's Canadian University All-Stars. And if we have some American listeners watching, it's not the same. It's not like they're going up against like Michigan's All-Stars and North Dakota. This is the CIS, a little bit different here in Canada. So we'll get that World Junior talk at the end of today's show. But Mikey, last time you and I talked, I was on my way to Ottawa. I saw the Battle of Ontario. It was a competitive game in terms of a skills standpoint. But I gotta say, I missed the gong shows that sometimes deteriorated in between these two teams. Our comment section was blowing up, calling it the Ballet of Ontario, because there was absolutely no physicality on either side.
No, it was a bit of a more of a tamer game, I suppose. But, you know, I realistically, that's what you expect at this point when it comes to the Maple Leafs. They're not getting in these games where they're looking to drop the mitts and fight a whole lot. Like it's just not going to happen. Yeah, Brady Tkachuk probably, he's trying to do his best to get under the skin of some guys, but I don't know, man. Like Toronto, their players they're so subdued. They just couldn't care less. They just want to go out there and play hockey, and is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. I'm not going to be old man yelling at cloud, but I will say I was discussing this on Locked On Senators today, so I'm not going to get into it too deep here. But one very funny stat, and yeah, a lot of them are 10-minute misconducts at the end of games. He got another one last night, Brady Tkachuk, after a penalty shot where Kochetkov, I love the diving poke check. I do love diving poke checks. I think they have a place in the game, but you at least should have to have your stick make an attempt to go to the puck. The puck's on the left side, and Kochetkov dives and pokes Brady Tkachuk's right skate out from under him, which to me is like, it's a trip. I don't think it's as dirty as some people. I don't think they should be throwing him out of the league, but if a guy's coming on a breakaway, you shouldn't be able to just poke his skate out from under him, and he's coming in with a ton of speed. Bit of a dangerous play, but here's the stat, Mikey. In the Senators' 11 wins this season, Brady Tkachuk has 10 goals and 4 penalty minutes. In their 12 losses, he has 3 goals and 54 penalty minutes.
So you're saying that they're better when he's on the ice and not in the box? Is that what you're concluding here, Ross?
Yeah, something like that. Something like
Yeah,
that. But
maybe.
anyways, we get more into that locked on Senators. But hey, the Leafs had a big milestone this week. John Tavares, 2 points on Long Island. They get the loser point in that one because the Islanders end up winning in OT. But I mean, I was all over it at FanDuel. I think when there's a milestone to be had, when it's the father's trip, everything, and playing against his former team, like
Yeah.
everything lined up. He was going to get 2 points.
Yeah, no, I took advantage on FanDuel as well and took the 2+ points that night. And it was, he barely got it. Like, with 6 seconds left, he gets an assist on the game tying goal that brought it to overtime. It was awesome, honestly, just to kind of see the whole team celebrate. They got the permission to leave the bench and kind of mob him, after he got the point. And like you mentioned, the dad's trip. So his father in the building, you saw his reaction that they showed multiple times on the telecast. It was really awesome to see. And then it just adds an extra layer that it was done against the New York Islanders, like the team that he left, the team that he started his career with, but then left, obviously, to come to Toronto. Did you like, what did you make of the boos? Like, when they flashed on the screen, congratulations, John, 1,000 points in his career, which most of which was done with the New York Islanders. And then there was mixed reaction. I'll say that there were some claps, but there were kind of more boos than claps. Like, what did you make of that? Like, I like, in one regard, I understand they're fans. They can do whatever they want. They're hurt by it, but at the end of the day, like, that's a major accomplishment. He's a guy who spent so much time in that city, in that community. He did a lot of good things for that community while he was there, and to boo him on that milestone, I thought was a little childish.
Yeah, I think the time and place is the key there. Like, if they were up 4-2 and Tavares scored the second goal to make it 4-2, right? It would have been a bit different. It was a game tying goal with 6 seconds left. So if you're a fan in the crowd, you're like, what? We need 2 points. We need to win this game. So I think it's as simple as that. I think that relationship in the past history be damned. I think that was just, why would you be cheering for your team getting scored on and not getting a regulation win when 2 points is everything? I get they win the game. I think that the reaction would have been much better from the crowd if after the Islanders win in overtime, right before the 3 stars, it's like, hey, we want to congratulate John Tavares, or name him one of the stars in the building, and say as he comes out for a twirl, if he's willing to even do that. I know the losing team doesn't often, go out, or the visiting team, I should say, doesn't go out and do a spin for the 3 stars. I think that would have been a better reaction. They just
Maybe.
want to win the game. I think that's where I'd draw that one. And it was 6 seconds left, right? It was goalie pulled. It was all hell breaking loose. I don't think that it would be a very New Yorker thing to do, to be cheering somebody on the other squad like that. Whether it was John
True.
Tavares or whether it was, even Zach Parise, let's say, who had tons of great years on Long Island, if he had signed somewhere else and hit a milestone. Just different circumstances, what I mean.
That's not even remotely the same, but
What do you
anyways.
mean?
Zach Parise and John Tavares are not on the same
Okay.
wavelength when it comes
I
to
just
stars from
pick
New
a
York.
player. Pick a player then. The
Any,
former.
I mean, it doesn't really matter who it is. Like, like if Anthony Bavillier, no one, he's not gonna get there. Like, that's not even the same guy. It's not the
Mm,
same. Not even remotely the same. There is
no,
no other player. There's literally no other player, I think, that's currently in the NHL that is on Tavares's level that would garner that type of respect from their former team.
there's
That
literally
left
one
the
in
island.
Ontario. I've been
True.
arguing, making this Claude Giroux going
That
back to Philly.
no, that left the Islanders. I'm talking about the Islanders
Oh,
specifically.
okay. Okay. Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
he's
yeah.
the only guy currently playing that would garner any type of respect.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I think overall, yeah, if it wasn't with 6 seconds left for a game that would have been a
Maybe,
win, and now it's like,
maybe.
then I'm thinking it's a different reaction. But either way,
But they're
congratulations to
booing the
John
guy every
Tavares.
time he touches the puck. Like, it's been 6 years. Like, let's get over it here, fellas. I
Well,
mean,
I think
the
at a certain point it becomes the Montreal thing where you just boo players when they're good, right? You're just trying to get them off their game. I think
I
that's what it's like
guess.
developed into. I'm sure there's still some who are, taking it very seriously. We saw the jerseys with 91 Trader on the back, but that was 2019. Like, we've lived through a pandemic since then. I hope people can, move on to an extent, but at the same time, it's still sports. It's still fun. And, booing is a way that the fans can feel like they're having an effect on the game. So from that standpoint, I like it, but I also think that, yeah, like it's time. Like, the Islanders have made the conference final twice. Like, they've been pretty successful without him. I think that it's not like, if he left and then the team went to shit and then there was just like, oh my God, what do we do now? That's one thing, but like they've been fine.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I agree, but it is what it is. We spent too much time and oxygen on this conversation.
Well, I still think it's a nice milestone for him to hit. John
No, no,
Tavares
no.
began.
That is, I'm talking about the fans' reaction to the
Mm.
milestone. The milestone itself is amazing. Only 98 players have ever hit 1,000 points. Which every time I hear that stat, I'm surprised again by how little people actually do that. Like anytime someone hits, it's like, oh, he's only the 96th person. He's only the 97th person. And again, it happened. Tavares only the 98th person to hit 1,000 points in the NHL. So 100%, it is an amazing feat in the National Hockey League. Not many guys have been able to do it, and it certainly is going to be celebrated. I believe Toronto's going to be doing some sort of ceremony when the Rangers are in town next week. He'll get like his silver stick and everything. So it certainly is a great accomplishment for Tavares, and he deserves a hat tip from us here, from the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm just saying the fan reaction stuff is a little overplayed.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the third 1,000-point milestone in the past year. Joe Pavelski and Claude Giroux both just hit that milestone. Jason Spezza got within 5 points before retiring. Phil Kessel is 8 points away. Phil Kessel is 8 points away.
You think Kessel ends up getting a contract and comes back?
So the question I was going to ask you as we head into break, Phil Kessel is 8 points away but doesn't have a team. Beyond that, like, I don't know if there's another player that's going to get to 1,000 before Connor McDavid, who's at 888. Like, the only other active players between Connor McDavid and 1,000 points are Corey Perry, 108 points away. That's not
barely
happening.
Barely active.
And Blake Wheeler is at 930. All due respect, he's not getting 70 more points.
He had a couple goals last night against Toronto. He's been moved up to the top line. If he plays for another couple years,
But he's not getting it before McDavid. He's not getting it before McDavid gets 112.
Probably not. Yeah, probably not.
So who gets to 1,000 points next? We'll answer that after the break. Is it Phil Kessel, only 8 points, but doesn't have a team? Or Connor McDavid, 112 points away? Or is it somebody else, whether it's Blake Wheeler, who's sitting at 930, or Brad Marchand is 113 points away, just 1 point back of Connor McDavid? We'll have that conversation next. You're listening to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time. It's the only place I go when I want tickets to a sporting event, concert, live music, comedy, anything. I go to Game Time because buying tickets to your favorite event should not be stressful. Killer deals, last minute tickets, and their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over tickets and get hyped for all the fun that you'll have. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has ticket deals right up until the day of the event. I love flash deals. It's like, oh man, got to jump on this right now. You can get those with the Game Time guarantee. That means that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Get images of your seat before you buy so you'll know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're all set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you'll never have to dig through your email. So get tickets without the stress at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Welcome back, Locked On NHL. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me 5 days a week over at Locked On Senators. It's the Battle of Ontario edition. My co-host, Mike DiStefano, is at Locked On Maple Leafs. We also have to get into the Metropolitan. It is crowded in the Metropolitan Division. We'll get to that, and also an NHL All-Star Skills Contest update, and Team Canada imminently announcing their World Junior roster. So we'll bring you all that later on in the show. But Mikey, what's your answer? Who gets to 1,000 points next? Is it Phil Kessel at 992 without a team? Is it Connor McDavid at 888 and flying up the ranks? Is it Brad Marchand at 887 or Blake Wheeler at 930?
I'm gonna go with Phil the Thrill Kessel. I think he does end up.
Ooh.
I think he ends up with a team this year, and 8 points is very easy for someone to put up in the NHL. I think he'll be able to put up 8 points, very very quickly. The problem I think with Phil though is like he currently has that Iron Man streak. If you remember what happened with was it Yandel who had who had the Iron Man streak prior, it became a bit of a gong show. And then when they finally decided to healthy scratch him, it was a big story. So if you're Phil Kessel, I think basically whichever team that brings him in, I think they're going to look him in the eyes and say, look, there's a chance that you lose your Iron Man streak. You can either retire now and you can retire as an Iron Man, or you come in and there's a good chance that you end up sitting for a game or so, unless obviously he turns out to, you know, finds the fountain of youth or whatnot. But if someone's bringing him in mid-season, I'm thinking it's going to be as a depth role. So he's got to know that coming in, and that's what I think maybe teams are wrestling with. Do they want that headache on their hands for when they inevitably end his Iron Man streak? And is it worth signing him to do so and have to go through that? That's why I think it's taking maybe a little bit longer for him. But we'll see what ends up happening. I've heard possibly a reunion with Rick Tocchet in Vancouver perhaps could be a spot for Phil Kessel, especially if they end up trading away Andrei Kuzmenko. They already moved on from Beauvillier, so there is some winger spots that are opening up for a guy like Kessel. So that perhaps could be a spot, but with just 8 points needed, I do think he gets back into the NHL. I think he rattles off those 8 points and is the next man to hit 1,000. He'll be number 99.
36 points last year, 14 goals for Phil Kessel with Vegas, 82 games while playing under 13 minutes a game. That wrister is never going away, man. He's just got an elite shot. And like you said, the Tocchet experiment in Pittsburgh, he was like the Phil Kessel whisperer there with the Pittsburgh Penguins during those 2 Stanley Cup runs. So I think that would be a very smart bet that Vancouver's and the T online. And don't allow me to give any credit to these. These are rumors. I'm putting on my rumor boy hat. Apparently, he bought real estate recently in Vancouver, but who wouldn't?
Really?
Beautiful place to live, no matter what. Hey, if you can afford it. So
I know it's locked on. It's this is the Eastern Conference show, but I don't know of how much of a fit that is though. Like, yeah, it's interesting because he was the Kessel whisperer, Rick Tocchet was, but what Rick Tocchet asks of his players isn't necessarily the way that Phil Kessel plays hockey. And
well, it's
like
similar to Kuzmenko, right?
that's what I was about to say. Like, it's an issue with Kuzmenko. That being said, Kuzmenko's making 5.5 mil. You bring in a guy making, only 800 grand or whatever, a league minimum contract. There's a little more leeway, someone who could sit up in the press box and it's not going to hurt your team if he doesn't play, a two-way game. Whereas it's harder to do with a guy making 5.5 sheets.
Very well said. So we'll keep our eye on that, as well as our friends over at Locked On Vancouver Canucks. They've got your team every day, but we got to bring it back to the
You got to
Metropolitan.
answer.
What's that?
You got to make it. You got to answer.
Connor McDavid.
All right.
Connor McDavid. I just, why would I bet against Connor McDavid? 112 points for him, and he could do that this season. But no, realistically, I think it's the start of next year. Start of next year is where Connor McDavid will get to his 1,000 points, get the silver stick. They should start working on the platinum stick because 2,000 points is going to come quick for Connor McDavid in this league. The way he's playing right now, Mikey, only one man has ever gotten to 2,000 points in National Hockey League history. He got to 2,800. That guy, Wayne Gretzky. But wouldn't it be neat if Connor McDavid was the 99th player to get 1,000 points with the Gretzky, the Oilers, the comparison? Yeah. I think that would be pretty neat. But hey, what's been neat is watching these teams jockey for position in the Metropolitan Division, even in the Atlantic to an extent, with only 5 points separating second from fifth in the Atlantic Division. We know games played with the Senators, even though they're not taking advantage of any of them, but the games played disparity is still there, with some teams playing as low as 26 games. Outside Ottawa's played 23. Everyone else has played at least 25. And then you've got teams already at 30, like the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Columbus Blue Jackets. But I want to focus in this segment to the Metropolitan Division. You got to see up close the New York Islanders and the New York Rangers this week, with the Leafs having played both teams. The Islanders, though, They're pesky, man. They'll play low event hockey, but end up with wins. Whereas it feels like the Rangers, it's either they win by 5 or they get blown out.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I was taking a look at the numbers, obviously with both of those teams being Toronto's opponents this week. I was diving into their numbers lately, their underlying numbers, and the defense has dropped off a little bit for both sides, but surprisingly more so with the Rangers. Shesterkin's numbers also haven't been great. After last night giving up 6 to Toronto, that's 3 straight games. He's had a sub 900 save percentage night. He was like 870 and 880 something the games prior, and then last night gave up 6. So not great, obviously, for him. So the Rangers, I think they'll get it back on the rails. The last little bit, they've lost 3 of 4, and a lot of it is due to the guy who started net in those 3 games, Shesterkin. He hasn't been playing well. And defensively, they've been giving up a lot of chances as well. I think they're like 5th or 6th in expected goals against in that span as well. So defensively, they got to get it back on the rails, but I think they will. The Islanders are an interesting team because, like, they've won a few in a row here, but was it 2 weeks ago you came on the show and said that they were dead in the water, not a playoff team, and now here they are. Like literally 2 weeks later, they're 7-1-2 in their last 10 games and find themselves second in the Metropolitan. It's been an interesting season for the Islanders, but they're -4 in goal differential. Like that's where it's interesting is they're not getting the goaltending that you expect from Ilya Sorokin. Yet they're still actually rattling off some wins here and picking up points.
They certainly are. And I also want to highlight here the Philadelphia Flyers, who just incredibly are maintaining pace here. The +9 goal differential and 15 wins on the season, which is actually 2 more than the Islanders. Yeah, they've played 1 more game, but the Islanders with those 7 OT losses. And look, they've earned it in a few of them, right? They've scored late in a couple of games. And like, you know what? They put these points in that's the system that it is. So hey, if that's how they're going to, get more points, then power to them. But I think the Flyers, to me, have been more impressive the way they've been able to play with an undermanned squad, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're cooking. Like to me, they're not going away. Washington, to me, is the one I'm still not totally sold on. But again, they're looking like they're a team that's about to get help with Max Pacioretty starting to skate again after his offseason injury. And I'm curious to see them. I got to watch the Carolina Hurricanes beat Ottawa last night. And look, I actually got to cover them too last week when they were in Winnipeg. And they've had a tough stretch where they went Winnipeg, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, then all the way to Ottawa to play again. And they had 4 straight losses before winning 4-1 last night. But even that game against Ottawa, that was a winnable game for the Sens. The Hurricanes were undisciplined. They were giving up 4 power plays in the game. They went 4 for 4 on the PK, though. Ottawa's power play was just brutal. And then Carolina scored twice on the power play of their own. So hey, look, it's not how you win, it's how many. But to me, Carolina is still a long way from the team that we thought they were before the season. Same with New Jersey. Those 2 teams that we had basically in pen to be the teams in the top 3 with the Rangers.
1 and 2. We had them at 1 and 2 almost. Like
they don't deserve to be there. Like they're not just,
no.
It's not bad luck. Neither of those teams deserve it. And that's why they find themselves 5th and 6th right now.
If you would have told me that the Islanders, Flyers, and Capitals would be ahead of the Hurricanes and the Devils a week out from Christmas, a week and a half out from Christmas, I would have said, no, you're high. I'll take that bet all day that, one of those 2, if not both, would have been ahead of all 3 of those teams. But man, here we are. It's kind of wild at this point. And like the Hurricanes have played a lot of games. Like they've got 28 games. Like they're tied with Washington in points, both with 31. Washington's got 3 games in hand. And what I think is interesting about that team too is they've done this without Ovechkin providing any offense. If
None.
that guy wakes up, which is a big if, because it's been a struggle. Now he's putting pucks on net. He's still shooting a lot, but he hasn't been able to put the puck in the net. If that happens and he eventually turns into, the Ovi that we've grown to know and love over the years, that could be an interesting squad down the stretch. And maybe they can actually compete for a playoff spot. Because right now, to be in a top 3 spot with Ovi only having 5 goals in 20 some odd games, like there's a potential that team could actually compete for a playoff spot this year.
Coming up after the break, we'll discuss the Atlantic Division, NHL All-Star Skills Contest update, and Team Canada is imminently announcing their World Junior roster, and I have thoughts about it. We'll discuss that next. This is Locked On NHL, your team every day.
A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Matthews could score 50 goals, and the Leafs could hoist the Stanley Cup. Probably not your Senators, though, Ross. But you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. It's the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid or Crosby, McKinnon, Ovechkin, perhaps Matthews, Brady Tkachuk penalty minutes perhaps will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in any given game. To win a 100-time your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me. You can win 100 times your money by playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms and views for details and locational availability.
Welcome back, Locked On NHL. I'm Ross Levitan alongside Mike DeStefano here with you every Wednesday dissecting the Eastern Conference of the National Hockey League. As we pull up the Eastern Conference Atlantic Division, the Boston Bruins are still rolling, however, not as dominant as they once were. Still leading the division, though, 39 points. Florida's got 36, Toronto at 35, Detroit 34, Tampa 31, and then there's a pretty big drop-off. Montreal, Buffalo, both tied at 27. Ottawa all the way down there at 22. But I have to mention, it's in my contract with LOSP that they have played 6 less games than Buffalo and 7 games in hand on the Tampa Bay Lightning. It's absolutely ridiculous, and they're going to pay for it with a busy schedule coming up. But with the teams that are relevant right now, I'm not here to gaslight anybody into thinking the Sens are relevant, nor Buffalo, nor Montreal. But these 5 teams at the top, it can be any. You could tell me this would be maybe 100 different combinations, and I'd probably believe you, because any given night, the Tampa Bay Lightning look like the team that went to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals, or they look like a team that's over the hill. Detroit, they are very Jekyll and Hyde. They're also missing a lot. We're hoping that Dylan Larkin can get healthy, get back in the lineup sooner rather than later. Toronto's a bit of Jekyll and Hyde. And, for me, the Florida Panthers are the ones that, they've had a couple bad losses, but they're almost, to me, pulling away as the team that's most likely to finish top 3 outside of Boston.
Interesting. I guess you talk about what you're obligated to do as part of your LOSP. Well, on Locked On Leafs, we're liking what we're seeing out of Toronto. I'll tell you that. This is a team that's starting to win some games here. They had a gutsy win last night in New York. They blew them out 7-3. And it was a team who had played their 4th game in 6 nights. They were on night 2 of a back-to-back, playing their 3rd-string goaltender. And, the flu bug was going around. Matthew Knies was a late scratch. They were forced to go 11-7. And, they still ended up pulling out a pretty big victory. And it was because the big boys got going. Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, both with a pair of goals in that game. And that's when this team's at their best, when those 2 guys are going. And that really hasn't been the case through the first 25 games of the year, really. It's been pretty inconsistent for those 2. But the last week and a half, it looks like these guys are starting to put together some solid performances, and they're stringing together, a good stretch of hockey here. Matthews has goals in 3 of his last 4 games, and he's got 6 or 7 goals in his last 5. This guy's starting to really put it together, and he's leading the NHL now again in 21 goals. If he can get on a heater, and if this team can get some consistent play from those top guys, I think there's no doubt that this Toronto team can factor into, the top of that division. They're only 4 points out from the Boston Bruins from leading this division. And in my mind, these 2 teams are kind of going in opposite directions. Not that Boston's playing terrible, but they certainly aren't playing at the same pace that they were earlier, and things are starting to kind of settle in for them. Whereas Toronto, they're starting to really, really take off. The defensive game is rounding into form. They're getting they're finally figuring out that penalty kill. They've killed off 28 of their last 30. I like what we're seeing from the Maple Leafs. I think that's a squad that for sure will be competing for this division title very, very soon.
Well, should note Boston's in one of their stretches right now where they haven't played a whole lot. They've only played 4 games in the last 13 days. They
Yeah,
played tonight as well.
right, in Toronto, like you talk about how Ottawa has a bunch of games in hand. Like a week ago, Toronto had 2 or 3 games in hand on Boston, and fortunately for them, they took advantage, right? And
Yeah.
and they were able to close the gap, which was once 9 points, as little as a week and a half ago, and it's now just 4 points.
Yeah, you're right. 3-0-2 in their last 5 games. I got to see them up close and personal. I mean, Ottawa basically doubled them on the shot clock, but you got to pay your goalie as well. And are you worried though, without Joseph Woll, that things might get more difficult? Or are you thinking Martin Jones is going to keep rolling along here with Ilya Samsonov?
Well, I'm not. There's slight concern, obviously, in the goaltending situation. But that being said, like Samsonov, his first game back, he did shut out the Nashville Predators, who've been playing some pretty good hockey. All right, they're scoring a lot of goals this year too, and he allowed none. They played very well against them, and then had 2 pretty solid games against the Islanders and the Rangers. Lost in overtime to the Islanders, and then beat the Rangers 7-3. So I think the goaltending, they'll be fine as long as the big boys can maybe like outperform the goaltending woes. I think we'll see some maybe high scoring games, a lot of overs to bet on over on FanDuel for these Leafs games down the stretch.
So for more on that, make sure you're checking out Locked On Maple Leafs, Locked On Senators, local experts on the biggest stories right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Doesn't sound like we're going to get the final roster for Team Canada just yet. Cuts are coming later this afternoon. But to me, and I want to be brief on this because I know we could open up a can of worms. I wish that there was a way that the NHL could at least make their schedule not as heavy over the holidays so that we could see the best on best under 20 players. Because every year, and with the NHL trending younger and younger, there's going to be 7 or 8 players that are unavailable to go to this tournament because they're too important at the NHL level. We could see Connor Bedard destroying his own age group, but it doesn't make sense. And I get why the NHL teams aren't sending them. But for guys like Matthew Poitras with the Boston Bruins, he's been a healthy scratch. He's playing 12 minutes. Like, let these guys go and play and represent their country, and let's see a best on best World Junior.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, lightening the schedule, sure, for our viewing purposes, so that we don't miss games. Although I believe it's in Europe this year, so there's gonna be a lot of
Sweden.
afternoon games. Yeah, which is in Europe. Thanks, pal.
Scandinavia.
Still Europe. Anyways, but like, there's no reason for Connor Bedard to be in this tournament. Like, it would be unfair for him to be like, I mean, the guy's lighting up the NHL. It'd be very unfair. Poitras, however, I think there's an argument to be made there, and I think that the report that Darren Dreger had earlier saying that it wouldn't surprise him if the team only announced 15 skaters or 15 forwards as opposed to 16, because they might be expecting Poitras to get loaned to the Team Canada for the World Junior Championship. So I think that he probably does end up playing, making it mandatory for all of the 20 and under players. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense.
What does make sense at the NHL All-Star Game? You mentioned that there's a lot of changes being made. What's the play?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We did hear earlier in the year that they were going to be bringing back the draft, which both you and I big time fans of. But the All-Star Skills Challenge is also going to be getting a big revamp this year. So the way that's going to be taking place is the fields of the challengers now taking part in it. The competitors, it's going to be limited to just 12 players this year. So not everybody has to take part in it, just 12 players. League executives and the NHLPA are going to vote on the top 8 players, and then there'll be a fan vote for the final 4 spots. There'll be 6 different events. Each skater has to participate in 4 of them, and they get to pick which events they want to participate in. So the events are fastest skater, hardest shot, stick handling, one-timers, a passing challenge, and an accuracy shooting challenge. So you get to choose which 4 of those you want to take part in. There could be events that have, up to 8, 10 players in them, and there could be events that only have 3 players in them. So you kind of need to decide which one you want to go into. And why it kind of is interesting is it's now going to be a point system. If you get first place in the event, you get 5 points. If you get fourth place, you get 4 points. Third place gets 3 points, on and on and on. And only the top 8 from those 12 players will move on to the next round, which is an NHL shootout event where players will get the chance to pick which NHL All-Star goaltender they want to shoot on. And then from there, the top 6 make it through, and it's an obstacle course which combines elements from the original event, the fastest skater, stick handling, passing challenge, whatever. And from there, there's one crowned champion of the skills competition, and that champion will get $1 million for the victory.
Ooh, I like that. These all sound like great changes coming to the All-Star game, which will happen in Toronto this year.
Yep.
And I wonder how that's going to affect people's psyche. Toronto, great city. Lived there for 5 years. You're there right now. And I will say, though, a lot of All-Stars like packing their sandals for the All-Star game. So it's not going to be quite that type of are they going to bring a beach? Are they going to they're going to put a dome over Woodbine Beach, and make it 25 degrees and sunny?
Hey, they could if they really wanted to, but I'll tell you what, $1 million on the line, that probably is enough to get the superstars there. And say this, the league spoke with Connor McDavid about this, and McDavid supposedly helped them and had input into which events should be used for this competition. So actually speaking with the players to get their input, I think goes a long way too, to make sure that they have buy-in into what's going on here. And I think it should be an interesting changes and an interesting event.
I just want it on record. I'm a Cherry Beach guy over a Woodbine Beach guy.
I'm just not a beach guy in general, to be completely fair with you. I mean, I grew up with a pool in the backyard. I never had to go to the beach.
The guy lives right on the waterfront in Toronto, folks. Not a beach guy. All right, Mikey, great show today. Locked On Leafs, Locked On Senators is where you can find us 5 days a week. They get more into the All-Star skills competition changes on Locked On Leafs. You can go check that out there. We'll hand it over to Power Ranking Thursday on Locked On NHL. For Mike DiStefano, I'm Ross Levitan. Thank you for watching. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.